A maid's daughter gave her last $5 to a stranded stranger, unaware she was helping a lost billionaire. She never expected that one bus ride would end with a shocking revelation. No pay, no ride. The driver's command was brutal, leaving a confused elderly woman shivering on the curb. 12-year-old Betsy froze. In her pocket sat $5, her family's entire emergency fund, essential for their survival. Using it meant no milk for dinner, but watching this cruelty felt worse. With shaking hands, Betsy jammed her foot in the door and dropped her last coins into the box. She didn't know she was saving a billionaire. She only knew she couldn't look away. A single tarnished quarter can weigh more than a bar of gold when it is all you have left. 12-year-old Betsy Miller stood on the corner of the wealthiest street in town, clutching a silver dog tag in one hand and her bus fare in the other. She watched the sleek cars glide by, wondering if anyone inside them ever worried about how they would get home. The autumn wind in Fairview was different than the wind in the East End. Here, on the wide avenues lined with oak trees and manicured hedges, the breeze smelled of burning fireplaces and expensive polished leather. It rustled through the copper leaves with a gentle whisper, polite and reserved. In the East End, where Betsy lived, the wind had teeth. It howled through cracks in the window frames and carried the scent of diesel fumes and damp concrete. Betsy tightened her grip on the plastic grocery bag she carried. Inside were her mother's work clothes, a black uniform and a white apron that smelled faintly of lemon polish and bleach. Her mother, Linda, was still inside the sprawling brick mansion behind the iron gates, finishing the floors. Linda had hurt her back the week before, a dull ache that turned into a sharp spasms by the afternoon. So, Betsy had come after school, sneaking in through the service entrance to scrub the baseboards and dust the high shelves while her mother handled the heavy vacuuming. It was a secret arrangement. The homeowners, the Harrisons, did not like children. They especially did not like the children of the help, seen or heard. Betsy adjusted her thin denim jacket. She was small for 12, with blonde hair that she kept braided tight against her scalp to keep it out of her face. Her eyes were a pale, watchful blue, the kind of eyes that saw everything but expected nothing. Against her chest, hidden beneath her t-shirt, lay the cold metal of her grandfather's dog tags. They were her talisman. Sergeant William Miller, the medal read. A hero from a war everyone respected, even if they had forgotten his family. She checked the time on the old digital watch her mother had given her. The number 40 bus was due in 5 minutes. If she missed it, she would have to walk 4 miles in the dark. She reached the bus stop, a lonely bench situated under a flickering street lamp at the edge of the affluent district. It was the borderline. On one side, the mansions stood tall and proud. On the other, the road dipped down toward the highway that led to the factories and the row houses. Betsy sat on the edge of the bench. She wasn't alone. Sitting on the far end was an older woman. She looked out of place, like a piece of fine china left out in a storm. The woman wore a coat that looked like it had once been camel hair, but it was smudged with dirt on the sleeve. Her white hair was pinned up, though several strands had escaped and blew across her forehead. She sat with a rigid posture, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Betsy studied her from the corner of her eye. The woman didn't look like the usual people who waited for the number 40. The usual crowd consisted of tired nurses, construction workers covered in drywall dust, and people like Betsy, invisible people. This woman looked like she belonged in one of the houses on the hill, yet here she was, shivering slightly as the temperature dropped. The woman turned her head. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, but clouded with a sudden, frantic confusion. She patted her pockets. She looked down at the ground. She checked the empty space on the bench beside her. "Is something wrong, ma'am?" Betsy asked. Her voice was quiet. She had learned long ago that being loud only attracted trouble. The woman looked at Betsy, startled. "My bag," she said. Her voice was refined, clear, but laced with rising panic. "I had a handbag. I placed it right here." Betsy looked around. The sidewalk was empty. "Did you leave it somewhere?" I don't know." the woman admitted, her shoulders sagging. I went for a walk. The gardens were so lovely, and I just kept walking. I wanted to see the leaves turn. I must have set it down when I rested on the stone wall 3 blocks back. She let out a breath that was more of a shudder. Oh dear. My phone. My wallet. Do you want me to run back and check? Betsy offered, standing up. No, no, the woman said quickly, waving a hand. I can't send a child. Besides, my legs. They are done for the day. I just need to get back. She paused, looking at the street sign. I am not entirely sure where back is from here. Before Betsy could answer, the heavy rumble of a diesel engine shook the pavement. The number 40 bus rounded the corner, its brakes screeching like a wounded animal. It was a hulking machine, scarred with rust and streaked with city grime. The doors hissed open. The driver, a man with a thick neck and eyes that looked like he hadn't slept in a decade, glared down at them. His name was distinct on his badge. Gus. Betsy knew Gus. Gus didn't wait for anyone. Gus didn't smile. Let's go, Gus barked, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. I'm behind schedule. The older woman stood up, swaying slightly. She approached the steps of the bus with hesitation. She looked up at the driver. Sir, she said, her voice trying to maintain dignity. I seem to have misplaced my purse. If you could just take me to the downtown station, I can contact my… Gus cut her off with a harsh laugh. No pay, no ride. That's the rule, lady. Read the sign. The woman blinked, her face flushing a deep crimson. I am not asking for a handout. I am in distress. I need to make my stops, Gus snapped. He reached for the lever to close the door. You got $3 or you got feet. Choose. The cruelty of it made Betsy's stomach turn. She saw the older woman shrink. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the shock of being spoken to like she was garbage. It was a look Betsy saw on her mother's face almost every day when the homeowners criticized a spot on a glass table. The woman stepped back onto the curb, her head bowing. I see, she whispered. I apologize for the delay. Gus snorted and started to pull the lever. Wait! Betsy's voice was louder this time. She stepped forward, jamming her foot in the door before it could close. Hey, get your foot out of there, kid, Gus yelled. Betsy didn't move. She reached into the pocket of her jeans. Her fingers brushed the paper bill and the coins. It was her allowance for the week, plus the emergency money her mom made her keep. $5. It was supposed to buy milk and maybe a treat for dinner tonight. She pulled the crumpled bills and coins out. She walked up the steps and dropped the money into the plastic fare box. It clattered loudly. That's for both of us, Betsy said, her chin lifted. She looked Gus in the eye. It was terrifying, but she channeled the stories she heard about her grandfather. He stood his ground. She would too. Gus looked at the money, then at Betsy, then at the older woman. He grunted, annoyed that he couldn't argue with cash. Whatever. Sit down. Don't cause trouble. Betsy turned back to the woman on the curb. She extended a small, callous hand. Come on, ma'am. It's okay. I paid. The woman looked at Betsy's hand as if it were a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. Her eyes, which had been dry, suddenly glistened. She took Betsy's hand. Her skin was soft, papery, and cold. Thank you, she whispered. Betsy helped her up the steep steps. The bus lurched forward before they were even settled, throwing them off balance. Betsy guided the woman to a seat near the middle, away from the back where the rowdier teenagers usually sat, but far enough from the front to avoid Gus's glare. They sat down on the cracked vinyl seats. The bus smelled of old rain and tired people. The woman smoothed her coat, trying to regain her composure, but her hands were trembling. You didn't have to do that, the woman said after a moment. She looked at Betsy with a piercing curiosity. That was your money. It's just money, Betsy said, shrugging, though her mind briefly worried about the milk. My mom says nobody should be left behind, especially not when it's getting dark. The woman stared at her. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She works hard, Betsy said. She pulled her bag of work clothes onto her lap, hugging it. She says working hard keeps your head straight. The bus hit a pothole, rattling the windows in their frames. The woman winced, grabbing the metal rail in front of her. This world, the noise, the smell, the roughness, was clearly alien to her. I am Eleanor, the woman said, extending her hand again, this time formally. Eleanor Caldwell. Betsy shook it. I'm Betsy. Betsy Miller. Miller, Eleanor repeated, testing the name. A solid name. And tell me, Betsy Miller, why is a 12-year-old girl taking the bus alone at this hour? Where are your parents? My dad died a long time ago, Betsy answered matter-of-factly. And my mom is still working. She cleans the Harrison house up on the hill. I help her sometimes, but I have to get back to start dinner and do homework. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. You help her clean? Shh. Betsy put a finger to her lips, glancing around. I'm not supposed to. The Harrisons don't know. If they found out I was there, Mom could lose her job. They think kids are messy. A shadow passed over Eleanor's face. Her expression hardened, not at Betsy, but at the invisible injustice of the situation. I see. They sound delightful. They pay okay, Betsy said, defending the only lifeline her family had. Mom says we just have to keep our heads down and be grateful. Grateful, Eleanor echoed, the word tasting sour in her mouth. She looked out the window as the manicured lawns of Fairview gave way to the smaller, cramped yards of the transition neighborhoods. It is strange what we are told to be grateful for. Betsy noticed the woman was shivering again. The heating on the bus was broken, blowing only cold air. Without thinking, Betsy unzipped her denim jacket. She wasn't wearing much underneath, just a thin white t-shirt, but she was used to the cold. Here, Betsy said, taking the jacket off. Put this over your legs. It helps. Oh, my dear, I couldn't, Eleanor protested, looking at Betsy's thin arms. You'll freeze. I'm fine, Betsy insisted. I'm tough. Grandpa's blood. She draped the jacket over Eleanor's knees. Eleanor touched the denim fabric. She looked at Betsy, really looked at her, past the worn clothes and the tired eyes. She saw the silver dog tags hanging against the white t-shirt. Is that your father's? Eleanor asked, pointing to the tags. My grandfather, Betsy said, her hand instinctively going to the metal. Sergeant William Miller. He was in the war. He saved his whole platoon. He got a medal and everything. Eleanor's breath hitched. She leaned in closer, her blue eyes widening. William Miller? From the 101st? Betsy nodded vigorously. You heard of him? Heard of him? Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. The confusion that had plagued her at the bus stop seemed to evaporate, replaced by a sharp, intense clarity. My late husband. He spoke of a Miller, a man who pulled him out of a burning transport when everyone else had run. The bus screeched to a halt at a red light. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the ghosts of 40 years ago. He never talked much about it, Betsy said softly. Mom said he was sad a lot, but he was brave. Yes, Eleanor said, her eyes glistening again. He was very brave. She looked at Betsy with a new expression, a mixture of awe and heartbreak. And here you are, his granddaughter, paying my fare. He would have done it, Betsy said simply. Yes, Eleanor murmured, gripping the denim jacket on her lap. He would have. The bus rumbled forward, entering the East End. The streetlights here were dimmer, some burnt out completely. The houses were narrow row homes, huddled together for warmth. This is my stop coming up, Betsy said, gathering her plastic bag. She hesitated. Do you know where you're going, Eleanor? The station is the last stop. It's about 10 minutes more. Eleanor looked out at the darkening streets. She looked terrified again. The confidence of the memory had faded, leaving her vulnerable. I believe I can call a car from the station, Eleanor said, though she sounded unsure. If there is a phone. Betsy chewed her lip. The station at night was no place for anyone, let alone an older lady who looked like she had money but no purse. It was where the drug dealers hung out. It was where the desperate people slept. You can't go to the station alone, Betsy said firmly. Not at night. It's not safe. I don't have a choice, child, Eleanor said. Betsy looked at the pull cord. She looked at the woman who knew her grandfather's name. She made a decision. Get off with me, Betsy said. We have a phone at our apartment. My mom will be home in an hour. You can wait where it's warm. We have tea. Eleanor hesitated. I couldn't impose. You're not imposing, Betsy said. She stood up and pulled the cord. The bell dinged. You're a friend, and Millers don't leave friends behind. Eleanor Vance, one of the wealthiest women in the state, a woman who had buildings named after her family, looked at the hand of the maid's daughter. She took it. Okay, Eleanor said. Lead the way, Sergeant. The stairwell of the apartment building smelled of boiled cabbage and floor wax. It was a steep climb to the third floor, and Betsy moved slowly, listening to the labored breathing of the woman behind her. Eleanor gripped the banister with a gloved hand, her knuckles white. The wood was rough, painted a thick, institutional gray that chipped away to reveal older, darker layers beneath. Just one more flight, Betsy encouraged, pausing at the landing. We have the best view. You can see the water tower from the kitchen window. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. She was a woman accustomed to elevators lined with mirrors and carpets that swallowed the sound of footsteps. This vertical ascent was a trial, not just of her endurance, but of her understanding of the world. She had passed buildings like this in her limousine for decades, viewing them as vague, brown blurs in the periphery of her life. Now, she was inside the blur. Betsy unlocked the door to apartment 3B. The lock was tricky. It required a jiggle to the left and a hard shove. The door swung open with a groan of dry hinges. Welcome to the castle, Betsy said, a small, ironic smile playing on her lips. The apartment was small, barely larger than the walk-in pantry in Eleanor's estate, but it was aggressively clean. The linoleum floor, though patterned in a faded 1970s yellow, shone under the single overhead bulb. The walls were painted a soft cream, covered in framed drawings of birds and pressed flowers, cheap art, but arranged with the precision of a gallery. Eleanor stepped inside, pulling her coat tighter around herself. The air in the room was chilly, perhaps colder than the hallway. She noticed blankets draped over the back of the sofa and rolled up at the bottom of the drafty window frames. Sit here, Betsy instructed, pointing to a floral armchair that had clearly seen better days. A crocheted afghan was folded neatly over the arm. I'll make tea. Do you like chamomile? It's all we have. Chamomile would be lovely, Eleanor said, sinking into the chair. Her legs throbbed. As Betsy bustled about the kitchenette, a tiny corner with a stove, a sink, and a humming refrigerator, Eleanor let her eyes wander. She saw the details that pride tried to hide. There was a stack of envelopes on the small dining table, organized by size. The top one had red lettering, urgent. Beside it lay a pair of reading glasses with a taped arm. The refrigerator door was covered in magnets, but instead of photos of vacations or parties, there were coupons. Dozens of them. 50 cents off bread. Buy one, get one free tuna. It was a mosaic of survival. Betsy placed a chipped mug on the low coffee table. Steam curled up, smelling of dried flowers. Mom will be home soon. She usually gets off at 6, but with her back, she takes the slow bus. Her back? Eleanor took the mug, wrapping her cold hands around it. The warmth was instant and merciful. She heard it lifting a sofa at the Harrison house, Betsy explained, leaning against the counter. Mrs. Harrison wanted the rug moved 3 inches to the left. Then she changed her mind and wanted it back. Mom didn't want to say no. Eleanor took a sip of tea to hide the grimace that crossed her face. She knew the Harrisons. Beatrice Harrison was on the board of the botanical garden with her. Beatrice was a woman who claimed to love delicate orchids but treated people like weeds. She should see a doctor, Eleanor said, her voice firm. Betsy looked down at her sneakers. Doctors cost money. Mom says heating pads and aspirin work just fine. The sound of a heavy latch turning made both of them jump. The door pushed open, and a woman stumbled in. It was Linda. She was younger than Eleanor expected, perhaps in her late 30s, but her face was etched with the gray exhaustion of someone who aged twice as fast as she should. She wore a black uniform under a heavy wool coat. She was leaning heavily against the doorframe, one hand pressed to her lower spine, her face pale and damp with sweat. "Betsy?" Linda called out, her voice tight with pain. "Baby, bring me the ice pack. I think I—" She stopped. She saw the woman in the floral armchair. Linda straightened up instantly, adrenaline overriding the pain. Her eyes darted from Eleanor to Betsy, wide with alarm. "Who is this?" "Betsy, what did I tell you about letting strangers in?" "Mom, it's okay," Betsy said, rushing to her mother's side to take her heavy tote bag. "This is Eleanor. She lost her purse, and Gus wasn't going to let her on the bus. She knows Grandpa's regiment." Linda blinked, the protective anger fading into confusion. She looked at Eleanor, really looked at her. She saw the quality of the coat beneath the grime, the posture, the silver hair. Linda knew the look of old money. She scrubbed the floors of it every day, but she also saw the trembling hands and the lost expression. "Mrs. Eleanor?" Linda asked, stepping forward with a slight limp. Eleanor set the tea down and stood up, despite her aching joints. "Mrs. Miller, please forgive the intrusion. Your daughter was my savior tonight. I found myself stranded, and she was kind enough to offer me shelter." Linda looked at Betsy, a mixture of pride and worry softening her features. "She's got a good heart. Too big for her own good sometimes." She turned back to Eleanor. "I'm Linda. I apologize. The place is a mess." "It is immaculate," Eleanor corrected her gently. "And warm." Linda let out a dry laugh as she unbuttoned her coat. "It's not warm, ma'am. The heater's been busted since Tuesday. We're using the oven for heat when the landlord isn't looking." She winced as she moved toward the kitchen. "Can I get you something to eat? We don't have much, but I can make toast. Or soup?" Eleanor saw the way Linda moved, stiff, guarded, every step a calculation of pain management. "No, thank you. I have imposed enough." "Nonsense," Linda said. She opened the refrigerator. From her vantage point, Eleanor could see inside. It was stark. A half-gallon of milk, a jar of pickles, a carton of eggs, and a solitary, wilting head of lettuce. The emptiness was not just a lack of food. It was a silent scream. Linda stared at the empty shelves for a second too long, her shoulders slumping. Then she pulled out the eggs. "Scrambled eggs," she announced with forced cheerfulness. "Breakfast for dinner. Betsy's favorite." "I love eggs," Betsy lied smoothly, setting the table. They sat together in the small kitchen. Eleanor, the billionaire matriarch of the Caldwell Empire, ate scrambled eggs on a cracked plate with a maid and her daughter. The conversation was halting at first, but Linda's natural warmth broke through. "So, you know about the 101st?" Linda asked, watching Betsy eat. "My dad never shut up about it when he was alive." "My husband served in the same battalion," Eleanor said quietly. "He owed his life to a man named Miller. I never thought I'd meet the family." Linda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She looked tired. "Well, the hero business doesn't pay much in residuals, does it? Dad left us the medals, but they don't pay the rent." She glanced nervously at the stack of bills on the table, quickly shuffling the red-lettered envelope to the bottom of the pile. "You work in Fairview?" Eleanor asked, probing gently. "Yes. For the Harrisons," Linda said, taking a sip of water. "Big house on the hill, lots of glass, hard to keep clean." "I know the house," Eleanor said. "And Mrs. Harrison?" Linda hesitated. It was the pause of an employee who knows she can be fired for the wrong word, even in her own kitchen. She's Exacting. She likes things a certain way. She's mean, Betsy interjected, looking up from her plate. She yelled at Mom last week for coughing. Betsy, Linda scolded gently. She's not mean. She's just particular. And today, Linda's voice trailed off. She rubbed her face with her hands. Today she sent me home early, said I was moving too slow with my back, docked me for the afternoon. The silence that followed was heavy. Eleanor felt a cold knot of fury tighten in her stomach. Docked pay for an injury sustained in service. It was barbaric. But to Linda, it wasn't barbarism. It was just Tuesday. I am sorry, Eleanor said. It felt inadequate. It is what it is, Linda sighed. I'll pick up an extra shift at the diner on the weekend if my back holds. We'll make it work. We always do. She reached out and squeezed Betsy's hand. We're Millers. We're tough. Suddenly, 3 loud, booming knocks rattled the front door. The sound was authoritative, demanding. It wasn't a visitor. It was a summons. The color drained from Linda's face. She froze, her hand gripping Betsy's so hard the girl flinched. Don't answer it, Betsy whispered. I have to, Linda whispered back. If I don't, he uses the key. Linda pushed herself up from the table, groaning as her back protested. She walked to the door and opened it a crack. A large man stood there. He filled the doorframe, wearing a grease-stained jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't look at Linda's face. He looked at the apartment behind her. Mr. Henderson, Linda said, her voice trembling slightly. I thought you were coming on Friday. Friday was yesterday, Linda, Mr. Henderson said. His voice was gravelly and loud enough for Eleanor to hear every word clearly. You're 5 days late. Again. I know, Linda pleaded, holding the door so he couldn't see inside. I got docked today, but I have a shift on Saturday. I'll have the full amount by Monday morning, I promise. Monday isn't good enough, Henderson spat. He pushed the door, forcing Linda to stumble back. He stepped into the entry. I got people lining up for this unit, people with cash. You think I'm running a charity here? Please, Linda said, her voice cracking. I have a little girl. We have nowhere else to go. That's not my problem, Henderson said coldly. He pulled a folded paper from his back pocket and slapped it against the wall. This is your 3-day notice. You pay up by Thursday at noon, or the sheriff puts your stuff on the curb. All of it. Linda stared at the paper, tears welling in her eyes. Thursday? That's impossible. Mr. Henderson, please. Thursday, he repeated. He turned to leave, but his eyes caught sight of Eleanor sitting at the table. He paused, sneering. You got money for guests? You got money for extra mouths to feed? But you ain't got my rent? She's just a friend, Linda defended weakly. Tell your friend to chip in or you're both out, Henderson growled. He slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. For a long moment, no one moved. The vibration of the slam seemed to hang in the air. Linda stood by the door, her hand covering her mouth, her body shaking with silent sobs. She looked smaller than she had a moment ago, defeated, broken by the weight of a few $100s. Betsy ran to her mother, wrapping her arms around Linda's waist, burying her face in the black uniform. Eleanor sat frozen in the floral chair. She looked at the mother and daughter clinging to each other in the dim light of the kitchen. She looked at the 3-day notice stuck to the wall. She touched the pocket of her coat, where her checkbook usually sat. It was gone. She had no phone. She had no wallet. She was, effectively, powerless in this moment. But as she watched Linda wipe her eyes and try to put on a brave face for her daughter, something shifted in Eleanor Caldwell. The confusion and frailty of the afternoon burned away. In its place was the steely resolve that had built a business empire from nothing. She wasn't just an old lady who lost her purse anymore. She was a witness, and she had seen enough. Morning arrived with the color of old slate. The light filtered through the thin curtains of the apartment, casting long gray shadows across the floor. Eleanor woke up on the sofa. Her neck was stiff, and her hips ached from the sagging cushions, but she had slept surprisingly deeply. For the first time in years, there was no hum of a climate control system, no distant beep of security keypads. There was just the sound of a city waking up, a distant siren, a dog barking, the clatter of pipes in the walls. She sat up, adjusting her wrinkled camel coat. In the kitchen, Linda was already awake. The younger woman stood by the counter, gripping the edge with white knuckles. She was trying to pour water from a kettle, but her back seized with every small movement. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Betsy was there too, dressed in her school clothes. She was carefully buttering a single piece of toast, cutting it into 2 precise triangles. "Here, Mom," Betsy whispered, sliding the plate toward Linda. "Eat something before the bus." "I can't," Linda murmured, her face pale and clammy. "My stomach is in knots. If Henderson comes back—" "He won't come back until Thursday," Betsy said, trying to sound brave. "We have time." Eleanor stood up. The movement drew their attention. She smoothed her hair, which was in disarray, and walked toward them. Despite her crumpled clothes and the fatigue etched into her face, the air of authority she had summoned the night before had not vanished. It had hardened. "Good morning," Eleanor said. Her voice was steady. "Morning, Eleanor," Linda said, forcing a weak smile. "I hope the sofa wasn't too terrible. I have to get to work, but Betsy can walk you to the station on her way to school." "I will not be going to the station," Eleanor said. She looked at the old, yellowed rotary phone mounted on the wall near the refrigerator. "And neither will you. Not today." Linda paused, the kettle shaking in her hand. "I have to work, Eleanor. If I don't show up, Mrs. Harrison will fire me. And if I get fired, we lose this place on Thursday for sure." "You are in no condition to scrub floors," Eleanor stated. She walked over to the phone. "May I?" Linda looked confused, but nodded. "Local calls are free, but I don't think—" Eleanor picked up the receiver. She didn't dial 911. She didn't dial a taxi service. Her fingers moved over the keypad with memory and precision, punching in a number she had known for 30 years. She waited. 1 ring. 2. "It is me," Eleanor said into the receiver. The voice on the other end was audible only as a frantic, high-pitched mumble. Eleanor cut it off. "Stop panicking, Robert. I am fine," she said. Her tone was no longer that of a confused grandmother. It was the tone of a woman who moved markets with a whisper. "I am in the East End, 402 Elm Street, apartment 3B. She paused, listening. "No, do not bring the police. And do not bring the ambulance. Bring the car, the Commodore. And Robert, bring the boys. I have guests." She hung up the phone with a decisive click. The silence in the kitchen was thick. Linda stared at her. Betsy stopped chewing her toast. "Who is Robert?" Betsy asked. "A very distinct man who worries too much," Eleanor said. She turned to Linda. "Linda, I need you to trust me. Do not go to work today." "I can't just skip," Linda argued, her voice rising with panic. "I don't know who you called, but I live in the real world, Eleanor. In the real world, if you don't work, you don't eat. I have to go." She grabbed her bag, wincing as she slung it over her shoulder. "I'm sorry. You can stay here until your ride comes. Just lock the door when you leave." "Linda, wait," Eleanor said. She didn't shout, but the command stopped Linda at the door. "Please, give me 20 minutes. If you still want to leave after that, I will not stop you." Linda looked at the clock. Then she looked at her daughter. Then she looked at the old woman who had slept on her couch. There was something in Eleanor's eyes, a fierce, blue intelligence, that made Linda hesitate. 20 minutes, Linda whispered. "Then I have to catch the 7:15. They waited. The minutes ticked by like hours. Linda paced the small living room, checking her watch every 30 seconds. Betsy sat by the window, watching the street below. Eleanor sat back in the armchair, hands folded in her lap, staring at the peeling paint on the ceiling as if she were planning a renovation. At the 18-minute mark, the atmosphere on Elm Street changed. It started as a vibration in the floorboards. Then came the sound. Not the rattle of the city buses or the cough of old sedans, but a deep, powerful purr. It was the sound of precision engineering. "Mom," Betsy said, pressing her face against the glass. "Mom, come look." "We have to go," Linda said, reaching for the doorknob. "No, Mom, look." Linda walked to the window. She looked down. Turning onto their narrow, pothole-riddled street was a convoy. 3 black SUVs, massive and gleaming, moved in a tight formation. They looked like sleek sharks swimming through a muddy pond. In the center of the formation was a long black limousine with tinted windows and diplomatic flags on the fenders. The convoy double-parked directly in front of their building, blocking the entire street. Neighbors were already stepping out onto their stoops. People were pointing. In this neighborhood, cars like that usually meant a drug raid or a politician looking for votes. "Oh my God," Linda breathed, stepping back from the window. "It's the feds, or the mob. Eleanor, who is coming for you?" "My family," Eleanor said simply. She stood up. "Shall we?" "I'm not going out there," Linda hissed, backing away. "I haven't done anything wrong. Betsy, get away from the window." "Linda," Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm. She reached out and took Linda's rough, work-worn hand. "You did the one thing that mattered. You opened your door. Now, let me open mine." There was a heavy knock at the door. Not the rude pounding of the landlord, but 3 crisp, respectful raps. Betsy ran to open it before Linda could stop her. Standing in the hallway was a man who looked like a mountain carved into the shape of a butler. He was 6'4", wearing a suit that cost more than the entire apartment building. He had an earpiece and a face made of granite. This was Robert. Behind him stood 2 other men, equally large, scanning the hallway. Robert looked at the small girl. He looked at the terrified mother. Then his eyes landed on Eleanor. The granite face cracked. His shoulders slumped in visible relief. "Mrs. Caldwell," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. He stepped into the room and bowed his head deeply. "We have been extremely concerned." "I know, Robert," Eleanor said, walking over and patting the giant man on the arm. "I went for a walk. It got extended." "The board is in a panic. Your son is flying in from London," Robert said. He scanned the room, his eyes narrowing at the poverty, the drafty window, the meager toast on the table. "Are you injured, madame? Did these people—" "These people," Eleanor interrupted, her voice sharp as a whip, "saved my life. They are to be treated with the utmost respect. Is that clear?" "Crystal, madame," Robert said, straightening up. He turned to Linda. "Ma'am, my apologies for the intrusion." Linda was pressed against the kitchenette counter, shaking. "Mrs. Caldwell?" she whispered. "Caldwell? Like the bank? Like the hospital wing?" "Like the Caldwell Group," Betsy whispered, her eyes wide. "We learned about them in social studies. They own everything." Eleanor turned to them. The mask was fully off now. She wasn't the frail old lady on the bus. She was the matriarch of an empire. "Linda," Eleanor said, "you mentioned you work for the Harrisons?" "Yes," Linda squeaked. "And you are worried about Mrs. Harrison firing you?" "Yes." "Mrs. Harrison does not have the authority to fire you," Eleanor said calmly, "because Mrs. Harrison's husband works for my subsidiary, and the house they live in is mortgaged through my bank. And quite frankly, I have never liked Beatrice Harrison." Eleanor gestured toward the open door. "Get your things, Linda. Bring the girl. Bring the dog tags." "Where are we going?" Linda asked, her mind unable to process the shift in reality. "We are going to get breakfast," Eleanor said. "Real breakfast. And then, we are going to fix this." Linda looked at her shabby apartment. She looked at the eviction notice still taped to the wall. She looked at Robert, waiting patiently holding the door. She grabbed Betsy's hand. She grabbed her purse. She followed Eleanor out into the hallway. They walked down the stairs, A strange procession. The billionaire, the maid, the girl, and the bodyguards. When they stepped out onto the sidewalk, the silence of the street was absolute. The entire block was watching. Mr. Henderson, the landlord, was standing by the front gate. He was wearing his grease-stained cap, his mouth hanging open. He stared at the SUVs. He stared at the men in suits. Then he saw Linda. He stepped forward instinctively. "Hey, Linda, what is this? You skipping out on the rent?" Robert moved. He didn't run. He just shifted his weight, placing his massive frame between Henderson and the women. He looked down at the landlord with the expression one might use for a cockroach on a dinner plate. "Is there a problem, sir?" Robert asked. His voice was low, terrifyingly polite. Henderson stammered. He looked at the limo. He saw Eleanor Caldwell stepping into the back seat, aided by a driver in white gloves. He recognized her face from the newspapers. The color drained from his own face so fast, he looked like he might faint. "No," Henderson squeaked. "No problem. Just saying hello to the tenants." Eleanor lowered the tinted window of the limousine. She looked at Henderson. She didn't scowl. She didn't yell. She just looked at him with a cold, detached assessment. "We will be in touch regarding the lease," Eleanor said. She turned to Linda and Betsy, who were standing by the open door of the car, looking afraid to touch the leather seats. "Get in," Eleanor said gently. "It's warm inside." Linda climbed in. Betsy followed, sliding across the plush seat, her eyes wide as she took in the minibar, the screens, the soft ambient lighting. The door closed with a heavy, reassuring thud, sealing them off from the smell of diesel and the cold wind. "Robert," Eleanor said into the intercom, "take us home." As the convoy pulled away, gliding over the potholes as if they weren't there, Linda looked at the woman sitting across from her. "I don't understand," Linda said softly. "Why? I just gave you tea." "You gave me your dignity," Eleanor said. "You gave me your daughter's coat, and you gave me the truth." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Linda's. "Now, we have some business to discuss regarding your employment. I believe you are vastly overqualified for the position of a maid." The limousine slowed as it approached a set of wrought iron gates that seemed to reach the sky. To Betsy, they looked like the entrance to a storybook kingdom, the kind where dragons were slain and heroes were rewarded. The gates swung open silently, admitting the convoy onto a driveway paved with cobblestones. They drove past acres of rolling green lawns, fountains that danced in the morning light, and statues of lions that watched them pass with stone eyes. Linda sat in the corner of the leather seat, her hand pressed against the window, her mouth slightly open. She had cleaned houses for 20 years. She had seen wealth, but she had never seen this. This wasn't just money. This was history. The car stopped in front of the main house, a sprawling limestone manor with ivy climbing the walls and windows that reflected the clouds. Robert opened the door. "Welcome to the Caldwell estate, madame." Eleanor stepped out, looking energized by the familiar air of her home. She beckoned to Linda and Betsy. "Come, the chef has been warned." Inside, the house was warm and smelled of beeswax and fresh lilies. It was quiet, but not the empty silence of the Harrison house. This silence felt peaceful, like a library before it opens. "First things first," Eleanor announced, handing her coat to a passing staff member. "Health." A man in a tweed suit was waiting in the grand foyer. He carried a leather medical bag. "Dr. Evans," Eleanor said, "thank you for coming on such short notice." "For you, Eleanor, always," the doctor replied. He turned his kind eyes to Linda. "And this is the patient?" "I'm fine," Linda lied automatically, straightening her posture and wincing as a result. "Just a little stiff." "She is not fine," Eleanor corrected. "She has been lifting furniture that weighs more than she does. Take her to the sunroom. Examine her properly." While Linda was ushered away, protesting weakly, Eleanor turned to Betsy. "Come with me, child," Eleanor said. She led Betsy into a massive kitchen. It was bustling with activity. Copper pots hung from the ceiling, and the air smelled of bacon, vanilla, and roasting coffee. A chef in a tall white hat stopped chopping vegetables and bowed. "Breakfast, madame?" "Everything, Pierre," Eleanor said. "Pancakes, eggs, fruit, the good sausages, and hot chocolate. The real kind." Betsy sat at a marble island that was bigger than her entire apartment. She watched as plates of food appeared as if by magic. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to calculate the cost of every bite. She ate until she was full, and then she ate a little more. 30 minutes later, Linda returned. She moved differently. She was walking slower, but the tension in her face was gone, replaced by a drowsy relief. "He gave me a shot," Linda said, sitting gingerly next to Betsy. "And a brace. He said I have 3 herniated discs. He said if I keep scrubbing floors, I won't be walking in 5 years." Linda looked at Eleanor, tears brimming in her eyes. "He wrote me a note for 6 weeks of bed rest. But I can't take 6 weeks, Eleanor. I have to work. The rent." "Eat your eggs, Linda," Eleanor said gently. "We need to talk about your employment." Linda froze. You mentioned that in the car. Look, I can't be a maid here. I can't lift anything right now." "I have 40 maids," Eleanor said, waving a hand dismissively. "I don't need another maid. I need someone who understands how a house works. I need someone who knows that if you move a rug 3 inches, it changes the room. I need someone who notices when the polish is wrong or when the staff is cutting corners." Eleanor leaned forward, her expression serious. "My current estate manager is retiring next month. It is a management position. You carry a clipboard, not a vacuum. You manage schedules. You hire and fire. You ensure the standards are met. And you sit down when you need to." Linda stared at her. I don't have a degree." "You have 20 years of experience in the trenches," Eleanor countered. "You know more about cleaning a house than any college graduate. The starting salary is $85,000 a year, plus benefits, plus housing on the estate grounds, in the guest cottage, until you are ready to buy your own place." The spoon dropped from Linda's hand. It clattered loudly on the marble. 85, Linda choked out. It was triple what she made working 3 jobs. It was a life preserver thrown to a drowning woman. "Is that acceptable?" Eleanor asked. "Yes," Linda whispered. "Yes. Oh my God, yes." "Good," Eleanor said. She took a sip of tea. "Now, regarding your previous residence." Linda's smile faltered. "Henderson. The lease. I still have to get our things. He's going to make it hard." "Mr. Henderson is no longer a concern," Eleanor said. She opened a leather folder that Robert had placed next to her. She slid a paper across the marble. It was a deed of sale. "I had my legal team contact the owner of your building while we were in transit," Eleanor explained calmly. "We made him an offer he found compelling. As of 20 minutes ago, the Caldwell Group owns the building on Elm Street." Betsy's eyes went wide. "You bought our apartment?" "I bought the building," Eleanor corrected. "It is in disrepair. It is a blight on the neighborhood. We are going to renovate it, fix the heat, fix the plumbing, clean the hallways." She looked at Linda. "And we are firing the current property manager. Mr. Henderson will be vacating the premises by noon. I believe the police will be assisting him, as we discovered some irregularities in his bookkeeping." Linda let out a laugh that sounded half like a sob. The monster under the bed hadn't just been scared away, he had been evicted. "We will need a new manager for the building," Eleanor continued. "Someone to oversee the renovations and ensure the tenants are treated with dignity. I thought, perhaps, you could oversee that project as well? From your desk, of course." Linda covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Betsy hopped off her stool and wrapped her arms around her mother. They held each other, the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights lifting off their backs. "Thank you," Linda sobbed. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Eleanor said softly. "I have a payment to collect." Linda looked up, wiping her eyes. Anything. The dog tags, Eleanor said. May I see them? Betsy reached under her shirt and pulled out the silver chain. The metal was warm from her skin. She handed them to Eleanor. Eleanor took the tags with trembling hands. She ran her thumb over the raised letters. Sergeant William Miller. Robert, Eleanor said quietly. The butler stepped forward and placed a small, framed photograph on the counter. It was black and white, the edges yellowed with age. It showed two young men in muddy fatigues, standing in front of a jeep. They were dirty, exhausted, and smiling with their arms around each other's shoulders. One was clearly Betsy's grandfather. The nose and the eyes were the same. The other was a young man with a sharp jawline and kind eyes. That is my husband, Eleanor said, her voice thick. Arthur. This was taken 2 days after William pulled him out of the fire. Arthur wrote on the back, Bill Miller, the reason I'm coming home. Eleanor looked up at Betsy. A single tear tracked down the billionaire's cheek. My husband came home, Eleanor whispered. He started this company. He built this life. We had a son. We had grandchildren. None of this would exist if your grandfather hadn't turned back into that smoke. She handed the tags back to Betsy, pressing the girl's small hands around them. You paid my fare, Eleanor said, but your family paid for my life. We are even, Betsy Miller. 6 months later, the winter wind howled through Fairview, but inside the gatehouse of the Caldwell estate, the fire was roaring. The cottage was cozy, filled with new furniture and the smell of beef stew simmering on the stove. Linda sat in a leather armchair, her feet propped up on an ottoman. She was reviewing a spreadsheet on a tablet. She looked different. Her skin was bright, the dark circles were gone, and she wore a soft cashmere sweater instead of a uniform. The front door burst open, and Betsy ran in, cheeks flushed from the cold. She was wearing a thick winter coat and a private school uniform, a plaid skirt and a blazer with a crest. Mom! Betsy yelled, kicking off her boots. I got an A on the history project, and Robert taught me how to drive the golf cart. Slow down, speed racer, Linda laughed, putting the tablet down. Wash up. Dinner is in 10. Betsy ran to the sink. As she washed her hands, she looked out the window. Across the great lawn, the lights of the main house were twinkling. She could see the silhouette of Eleanor in the window of the library, reading. Every Sunday, they had dinner together. Eleanor, Linda, and Betsy. They talked about school, about the estate, about the renovations at the old apartment building where the heat now worked and the rent was fair. Betsy dried her hands and reached into her pocket. Her fingers brushed against two things: the cool metal of her grandfather's dog tags and a single, shiny coin. She pulled the quarter out and looked at it. It was just a piece of metal. It couldn't buy much. A gumball. A few minutes on a parking meter. But once, on a cold afternoon when the world felt huge and cruel, $3 and a little bit of courage had bought a miracle. Betsy smiled, flipped the quarter in the air, caught it, and put it back in her pocket. Coming, Mom, she called out. She sat down at the table, safe, warm, and home. And so, we leave Betsy safe and warm, flipping a quarter that represents so much more than just 25 cents. It's a reminder that a single moment of courage on a cold bus can buy a miracle. I hope this story allowed you to step out of the cold wind and into the warmth, just like Linda finally did. I'd love to know where you were while listening. Maybe you were winding down after a hard shift, or sitting with a hot cup of tea like Eleanor and Betsy. Let me know in the comments. I read them all. If you want to ensure we cross paths again for more stories about hidden heroes, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. Thanks for spending this time with me.